chapter 16. Now, this is the last chapter in the first of 3 sections in the book. This first section was called Yesterday, ayer, interestingly enough. This is the last chapter in this section. The next section is called Today. Anyway, this is chapter 16, and it's a big transition point, so here we go. An insistent rapping woke him. Lola leapt towards the door. Her low-throated growl confirmed that someone was on the other side. Max looked around for signs Buelo had returned. He hadn't. Still groggy, Max glanced at the clock in the kitchen. 2 a.m? He rubbed his eyes. Who would come to the cottage at this hour? He walked to the door and leaned an ear against it. Who's there? A pilgrim, true of heart. Max groaned. Buelo, I'm too tired for games. He grabbed Lola's collar and opened the door. A tall, imposing man in mud-caked boots and a jacket with many large pockets stood in the threshold. He wore an oilskin hat and gripped a walking stick in one hand. Lola wriggled from Max's grasp, wagging her tail. The man laughed and took off his hat and stepped inside. He stooped to pet her. Hello, Lola. He straightened and bowed to Max. I am Father Romero, a friend of Feliciano Cordova Sr. and Jr. I have a delivery for them. You must be Maximiliano. I haven't seen you since before you could walk. How old are you now? 11? Almost 12. Father Romero didn't wear a cassock like the priest at Our Lady of Sorrows, and Max couldn't remember hearing Papa or Buelo talk about him. But Lola seemed to trust him, and she was a good judge. Father Romero looked over Max's shoulders. Is your father or grandfather home? Max shook his head. My father is in San Clemente, and Buelo's at a friend's. Father Romero blew out a deep breath. That complicates things. You see, I have... He stopped as if something had suddenly occurred to him. I should ask, are you familiar with... He scratched his head. How shall I put this? On occasion, there are those of us who help travelers get from one place to another. He leaned forward. Has your father or grandfather ever mentioned this? Was he talking about the Guardians? Weren't they a thing from the past? Do you mean the Guardians of the Hidden Ones? Yes, they've told me. Father Romero looked relieved. Of course they would have, so I'll speak freely and in confidence. 4 weeks ago, I brought a young woman here, Rosalina. Her parents had died, and she was in an unfortunate situation. Your father escorted her to the next safe place. Do you recall? 1 week last month, Papa had left to work on a bridge in Valencia. Was that another lie? Max nodded. Tonight, I have with me her sister, Isadora. Both have already been reported missing by the man who employed them, and there's a big reward to anyone who turns them in, said Father Romero. People will be hungry to talk and collect that money, so she needs to be moved today. But your father is usually the one. Your grandfather would know what to do. I believe there are substitutes in place. I'll get her situated and stay with her until daybreak. But then, unfortunately, I must leave. If you have any provisions for now, that would be helpful. Also, something to keep her warm. The tower will be drafty. Max peered into the yard, but he couldn't see anyone. She's at the fork, said Father Romero, and time is short. Yes, sorry. Max hurried into the kitchen and filled a large woven market bag with leftover cheese, bread, and a few figs. He pulled a blanket from the cupboard and grabbed one of Buelo's old sweaters. He stuffed the blanket and sweater inside the bag and set it near the door. Before I go, I need to point out some things on the map, said Father Romero. Max hesitated. The only map he'd seen in their home was Papa's work map. The one with all the bridges? Yes, quickly now. Max started for Papa's room and then stopped and turned. Were you the one to bring my mother? Father Romero shook his head. I only met her once when you were a baby. I had escorted 2 women to the tower. She helped me get them settled and brought you along. You were not yet walking. Max nodded and smiled. So it hadn't been a dream. He had been to the ruins before. As he hurried to retrieve the map, his mind raced. Buelo, Tio, and his aunties were no longer able to make the long journey. Who would Buelo ask to substitute? Who else could he trust? Miss Dominguez? A wild idea sprang to his mind. What if he escorted the hidden one? He could meet the next guardian who might have traveled with his mother. That person might know the way to Mañana Land. He could take Lola. No one would bother them if she was along. Max had gone with Papa to work remote sites before and slept outside under the stars. How hard could the journey be, anyway, especially if his aunties and Tio and Buelo had done it? Papa never believed Max could do anything on his own, but he could. He just needed to safely escort the hidden one and hand her off. Buelo said it only took 3 nights. He'd need another 3 nights to get back, so about a week. He'd still have plenty of time for the tryouts. He could leave a note. Max walked to the kitchen and handed Father Romero the map. I will take her. I sometimes substitute for my father. He studied Max. I didn't realize they'd already brought you into the fold. He scratched his head again. But now that I think of it, your father was about his age when he started. Still, his face twitched with worry. The situation is fraught since we know she is being followed. Her life and yours would be in danger. We should, Max interrupted. I'll take Lola. And Max stood straighter. You said she needed to be moved today. I'm pretty sure Buelo won't be back in time, and I want to do it. Guardians helped my mother. I want to do the same in return. Favor con favor se paga. Father Romero's face softened and he smiled, his eyes crinkling. Maximiliano, you are continuing a noble legacy. Helping someone in this way is humane and selfless. Max stared at the floor, nodding and avoiding his eyes. If he knew the real reason Max had volunteered, he wouldn't call him selfless. Father Romero unfolded the map on the table. Here are my recommendations. Don't leave by way of the village road. Use the footpath behind the ruins west of the tower. It leads to the riverbank. It's steep but well covered. He moved his finger along the river, stopping at one of the small black stars. I'd rest at the privet thicket tonight. I think she'll be too tired for much more. And tomorrow night, he skipped several stars and pointed to one farther north. I think she could make it to the outcropping. That depends on how things go. He tapped 3 more markings closer to the edge of the map. Any of these. Max nodded. The little black stars on the map weren't Buelo's fishing spots. They were places to sleep and hide. Follow the channel, but stay away from the water's edge. You'll be too easy to spot there. The river is a known path to freedom, and when someone is missing and there's a reward, sometimes people stalk the banks hoping to capture a runaway. No lights or campfires. If you're questioned, say you're heading to Caruso. Even though it's farther east than you are traveling, it's in the general direction, so it shouldn't sound suspicious. Max nodded. One more thing, stay on the river right until his finger followed the river north to the last numbered circle on the far left corner. This bridge, then cross over as usual. He tapped a spot off the map on the table. After that, you know the way. Max bent over the map and frowned. He didn't know the way. Should he lie and try to convince Father Romero that he'd been there but he didn't remember? He touched the last circle, bridge number 38. How would he ever find what was waiting beyond it? She's waiting, Father Romero said, straightening and shaking Max's hand. Thank you, my friend. Oh, and tell your father I was happy to send the information he requested of me last week. Father Romero quickly picked up the bag of supplies, put on his hat, and slipped into the night. What information? Asked Max, but he was already gone. Max stood in the doorway for some minutes, trying to make sense of all that had just happened. He shut the door and went back to the map on the table. Now he'd have to wait for Buelo to come home and confess what he'd done. Buelo would never let Max go and would call a substitute instead. Max scanned the legend for the corresponding name of the bridge number 38. 38, the bridge of 1,000 mallards, wide and deep channel. Max's heart skipped as the pieces dropped into place. He did know the way. He'd known it his entire life. Buelo had made sure of it with that story. He whispered, "In the north, far away and hidden, there's a secret bridge. It's just beyond the Bridge of 1,000 Mallards, which makes for a lot of quacking. After that, a dead-end cove." A smile crept onto Max's face. "Do you know what this means, Lola? It's more than a legend. It's a true story, just like Buelo always said." "It all makes sense now. The secret bridge is the next safe place. A pilgrim true of heart was the password. And the guardabarrera is a guardian, just like Papa, Father Romero, Buelo, Tio, my aunties, and now." Max gulped at the enormity of the task before him. "Me,